guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. Today's flick pick is Man on the Moon. Now, this is a really interesting movie, and it's based/inspired on the life story of Andy Kaufman. Now, I'm sure it's one of those movies that kind of flew under a lot of people's radar because they see Jim Carrey in the title and they think it's just going to be another Jim Carrey movie. And that actually is what happened with me. I didn't know who Andy Kaufman was at the time. And so when I went to see the movie, I assumed this was just a fictional movie, like a lot of Jim Carrey's work. And I thought I was just going to be seeing Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey. And I was quite surprised at what I ended up seeing, because it wasn't Jim Carrey. It was this totally different character. And I kind of left the theater a lot confused, kind of like a lot of people were, because they were like, how much of that story was true? The ending, is he really dead? All these questions, and who is this Andy Kaufman? And, I didn't grow up at that time frame where I was watching shows like Taxi, so I didn't really get to know who Andy Kaufman was. So it was kind of interesting that after the movie was released, when this was in theater, a lot of Andy Kaufman's work was being put out on video, and they were showing up in the stores. So I thought maybe I should look into this guy, because he's a really interesting person. He was a really interesting person, and how much of the movie was accurate, how much of the life story was true. And so, there was a lot of stuff that was released. I started picking up a lot of the true works of Andy Kaufman, like this was one of them that came out. It was his special, which is kind of neat. It did his Elvis impersonations and all the classic stuff that you actually see Jim Carrey perform in the movie. And, there's a bunch of these little specials that came out. This is like, thank you very much. And also a lot of his wrestling stuff, which again was portrayed in the movie. So the first thing I want to say is, how well did Jim Carrey pull off Andy Kaufman? And I'm sure there was a few other actors that probably could have done just as well. But I mean, Jim Carrey, you almost forget it's Jim Carrey. And that's kind of what I liked about this movie, was that I wasn't watching Jim Carrey, I was watching Andy Kaufman. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about this movie was they didn't try and bring in all these actors to impersonate a lot of the characters. They brought in the real people, the people that worked with the real Andy Kaufman. They brought in the actors from Taxi. They brought in, Danny DeVito, who was in Taxi, was actually playing George Shapiro, the producer guy, I guess, that worked with Andy Kaufman. So, I mean, even though he wasn't playing his character from Taxi, Danny DeVito was in the movie. Bob Zmuda, who was Andy Kaufman's friend, does play a role in the film, a very short role. He's on the set of the show called Fridays, which is, it's kind of like a Saturday Night Live. I guess it was on in the 80s. But anyways, he makes his appearance, but the actor who plays him, Paul Giamatti, does a really phenomenal job. I mean, he didn't go to the lengths to try and look like the real Bob Zmuda, but I mean, his role in the film was just great. I mean, he just nailed a lot of the atmosphere the movie was trying to portray, the silliness, the awkwardness, and that's what Jim Carrey was. Andy Kaufman. That's what Andy Kaufman was. He was your everyday clown. He was your jokester. You never knew when to take him seriously. You just didn't know. And so I started to actually look into how much of the movie was, in this movie anyways, how much they really portrayed his life. And I would say they got it pretty well. It wasn't, I would say the order of things wasn't completely factual, because, and they, to be fair, in the very beginning of the movie, Jim Carrey comes out and kind of does this little impersonation that the film is crap, and they mix things around for dramatical purposes, and he was right, and that's the joke of it all. I mean, what he was saying was absolutely correct. they switch things around. Like they really make the premise on him doing his Carnegie Hall, which is this performance here. And so they really make it like this is the climax of the movie. In actuality, he did this way before they portrayed it in the movie. They make it sound like he died after he did this, and he didn't. This was done much earlier. The whole thing with the girlfriend. Now they chose Courtney Love. Not sure why, but Courtney Love played his girlfriend, Lynn Margulies, which again they kind of skewed because he didn't meet her until much later on in his life, actually much closer to his death. Whereas in the movie they kind of introduce her right off the bat, and I'm sure that has to do with the agreement they had with Courtney Love, with wanting to have this side character in the movie. They show her through all the wrestling matches, and she would, and that's just not true. I mean, she didn't come in until much later. But I mean, these are little things that really don't matter. What this movie does is it really takes Andy Kaufman's life, puts it into this kind of blender, and says this was how this man lived, and this is how he functioned. And a lot of what I actually learned about the real character, I decided to get this book, which was written by Bob Zmuda. So who would know more about the man than like his best friend? And this was actually a quite interesting read. It has a well, it doesn't have a foreword, which is interesting. It has a backward. I'm just gonna pull that up. So I guess they just wanted to be silly, they just wanted to portray. And the interesting thing is, it's written in mirror image. So you have to hold it up to a mirror to read it, or you have to kind of read it backwards or whatever, it's like flipped around. And it's written by Jim Carrey. And it gives you instructions not to read this until you've read the whole book. And I actually did that. I didn't read it until I finished the whole book, and then I read it. It's a little bit of a cryptic message, and I don't know what they were trying to do with this, but it is interesting all the less. I was quite. I'll just show it again. I don't know if you can tell that it's written cryptic or not, but I don't know. I thought it was a really good ending to the book. Now, the whole thing that confused a lot of people, and I think and I said it too, and a bunch of people, I heard him say it when we left the theater. Is he really dead? Is Andy Kaufman dead? Because they, in this movie, in Man on the Moon, they kind of portray it like his side character, which is Tony Clifton. He plays this kind of lounge singer guy. Supposedly comes on stage a year after Andy Kaufman's death. And Bob Zmuda, who would normally play Clifton when Andy Kaufman wanted to reveal himself as, it's kind of a trick thing where they would swap roles just to keep the character almost like he's real. Anyways, so they end the movie showing Bob Zmuda in the audience while Tony Clifton is on stage. So now you're saying, well, and is he alive? Did he not die? Did he fake his death? And there was a lot of talk about that in the movie too, or, well, maybe not a lot of talk about it, but there was mentions of it about, him saying, maybe I should fake my own death because I've done everything else. And so they do talk about that. And he actually talks about it in this book too. He actually, well, Bob Zmuda does anyway, says that the topic came up about him faking his death and would it be possible, and if it is possible, how could he pull it off? And so another thing came out that I thought was really interesting. This film, The Death of Andy Kaufman, the filmmaker, Christopher Maloney, he decided to take on that challenge and figure out, did Andy Kaufman fake his own death? Is he alive somewhere, living in who knows where in the States, or in some silo somewhere, or did he, put prosthetics or go through surgery, change his name? Is he alive? Because the whole thought is, if he died, or sorry, if he faked his own death, he wouldn't have come back within a year or two. he'd come back in like 30 years or 40 years and be like, surprise, I'm alive. But obviously it hasn't happened to this date. And they do hold these, the fans and all that, they do hold these vigils or something, thinking that he's going to come in the door at some point, and he never does. So what this film does is it tries to go through the theories that he faked his death. And it does quite a good job, I would say. I think he really just comes to the conclusion that no, he didn't fake his death. He actually did die. And so did this book. This, Bob Zmuda at the end, he says, I was there, I watched him kind of, while he was going through his treatments, while he was sick, and he actually did die of cancer. So I'm going to say that I probably do believe that he has passed on, but I mean, it's great to keep the legend alive. It's great to think that Andy Kaufman is out there somewhere laughing at all of us because we think he's gone. Jim Carrey, he pulled the role off perfect. He was Andy Kaufman in the film. And, like I said, I found it hard to believe that I was still watching Jim Carrey. I started to get into the idea that he was Andy Kaufman. And I even saw on I think it was on IMDb, I was reading that Jim Carrey demanded that everybody call him Andy throughout the whole filming of the on and off set. He was in character the whole time, which is cool. He channeled Andy Kaufman. So yeah, so I just wanted to kind of go and give a little bit of a rundown of the stuff that I had and talk about this movie, because I still watch it every once in a while. I've seen this movie a few times. I just can't get enough of Andy Kaufman. I think he was a genius in his own way. He knew what he was doing. And we just don't have people like this anymore. If I had to say who would be similar today, I might go towards someone like Sacha Baron Cohen, who does like the Borat and all that stuff, and he goes around and messes around with people. But I mean, he does it just strictly for film. Kaufman did not. So, anyways, I hope you liked the video. Hope you've seen the movie. If you haven't, maybe I've inspired you to go and see it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I hope you subscribe, and talk to you later.